we asked for it. That would be great. Are you actually volunteering or just feeling?
I'm happy to take notes. I'm not on Jabber, but I can do the other.
Thanks. Thanks, Ed.
I'll take notes.
Okay.
Because I don't have Jabber. Okay. Actually, that would be better if we could done that is a problem, yes.
Yeah. Ed takes great notes, and then he speaks for about 20 minutes of the session, and so we always end up with sort of a white space in the notes when Ed was speaking.
You can share the Etherpad.
Yeah, me too.
Shall we start?
Yeah, we might as well. Can somebody pull the door shut at the back?
Oh.
So, morning all. This is the, thank you for staying till Friday. This is the DTN working group. Chairs, myself, Rick Taylor, Marc Blanchet. This is the Note Well as an IETF session. It is covered under the Note Well. I hope you have all read this before. I'll leave it for 30 seconds just in case you haven't. It is the standard Note Well. So our proposed agenda. We have a couple of the critical drafts that we've been working on for the last years are now in AD review. And the authors of the primary authors of those drafts have a few words to say about feedback and progress, just to keep us all in the loop. One of the comments that came out of that was there was an IPR flag raised over, I think, bundle protocol itself, or just sort of DTN in general, that we needed to make the ISG aware of, and I think that's relevant as a discussion brief. And I understand that I personally am not a lawyer. I don't know if we have any lawyers in the room, but we will also be looking for guidance from the AD in terms of what we can and cannot say as a working group and how that moves forwards. Ed Borain and one of his guys, Andrew Haberman, will be talking about the work they've been doing on AMP and where that is. Although that is not a charter item, I know it's something we've been circling around for a while and feeds into the later points, which is once BPBIS and BPSec and at least one convergence layer is done, is off into the ISG and hopefully RFC'd, then we need to look at the next charter items on our current charter, and if we wish to adjust, update, uplift the charter to add any new work items, which we've been itching to get on with, but have been holding for the primary three documents. So, and I know Scott has got a short presentation on things he wants to discuss. That can turn into a wider discussion, and that flows into that charter milestones and updates. So we'll talk about what we've got as part of that discussion and see if we can get some rough consensus in the room, and then we'll take the discussion onto the mailing list to try and work out what we do next. And then, of course, the mandatory any other business open mic. So, Administrivia, Ed Borain is the secretary, Mark and I have introduced ourselves, there is a Jabber room, there is Meet Echo as well these days, and we have lots of people on Meet Echo, so thank you very much for joining us. And that's the charter is on the IETF data tracker. I'm assuming most of you know how to find it, but there's the URL. So, Mark, I'm going to hand over to you at this point.
Oh, yeah? Okay, let me read. You did the slides.
I did the slides, okay, unfair. So, as I just said, the three major documents we've been bashing our heads against, no, that's unfair, that we have been working hard to get right over the last number of years are, and I'm looking around the room for anyone, there's a couple of people who are not familiar with what we've been doing, so I'll go slowly. The Bundle Protocol BIS document, so that is also known as Bundle Protocol version 7. So that is, how do we encapsulate a bundle? What are the rules for moving it around, et cetera, et cetera. It's a meaty document because it's one of the base underpinnings of the IETF DTN vision of how you do this, based on work in other standards bodies and organizations. To associate with that, because we use a layered model, TCP-CL is what CL is what we call a convergence layer, which is the analogy in an IP model would be your convergence layer is your layer 2, where your bundle protocol is your layer 3. So a convergence layer allows you to move bundles across a single logical link. So that's an important document. And the third one is Bundle Protocol Sec, BPSec, which is how do you enforce integrity and privacy and security around these things as they flow around your extended DTN network. So the good news is all three of those are now in the AD evaluation queue. They're basically in the IESG pipeline. We've had feedback from our AD on 2 of them. I think there's one more we're still waiting for, but
yes. Unfortunately, I haven't managed to get to the TCP convergence layers. I will strive to get that done before I go on vacation now in next week. So I will hopefully be able to read it at the beginning of next week and send some comments so you can process it while I'm off.
I saw this pretty interesting that the AD of transport was not looking at the TCP document.
Well, it was an obvious order here to read the document. So, yeah, working through the stacking, it looks the appropriate order. So,
so the other half of the slide is the what about section. So we have a couple of other working group documents that are, I think the authors believe they're pretty much done. So there's a question on which we last call, whether the working group is happy to last call those. And they are primarily the bundle protocol, the BPSec interop, I forget what SC stands for. It's the cipher suites. Security context. So it's a default set of cipher suites and best practices which really should move forwards with BPSec. And I think we've just let it lag, and I think it's the chairs to press the go button on. I think that's right.
Yeah, my dear colleague, co-chair, last meeting we actually agreed to do a working group last call on BPSec interrupt and MTCP-CL, but we haven't done.
No, so yeah, mea culpa or nu culpa, whatever the Latin for we is. I'm sort of mixing my Romance languages there. Nostra culpa. Thank you, Scott. So we will probably minimal TCP-CL, which is as simple as you can make it, great for lab environments, convergence layer. Should be last called, should get into the queue fairly promptly. The BPSec interrupt, again, is an important document. Oh, I'm going to move back from the mic. The BPSec interrupt document is an important document because without it, the BPSec document describes how to secure your bundles, but doesn't give any advice on how you should roll out a reasonably secure set of cipher suites and behaviors. So really, we have to press the last call button on that. The other one is the BPIC, I can never pronounce this, is bundle and bundle encapsulation. So it's how do we tunnel? It's a short, sweet, to the point document. It's been a working group document. It's had some review. I haven't seen much in the way of comments on the mailing list. So we'll do a last call on that unless anyone has any major objections. So I will probably hold off on, I'll cover this now. So these are some of the milestones that are still remaining in the current charter. And this follows on from the same topics we were talking about in Prague. So different sorts of convergence layer adapters, addressing architecture. I'm just reading the slide now and you can all read as well. So these are a list of some items that are on the current charter that need to be visited now that we've got the basic building blocks out of the way. And I know the management, the management piece has been floating around for a while because Ed and his team have been doing a great deal of what I personally believe is good work on asynchronous management. designed originally for the DTN use case, but I think actually has applicability outside of it. So that's, again, something to discuss. I know there's been presentations in the past on key management, and some people here are very interested in getting neighbor discovery formalized. Whether that's best practices or real protocols, I don't know. I had an offline discussion with the gentleman offering to do that work, and he apologized profusely for not having enough time, but I think we can all understand that. But we'll come back to many of these things at the second half of the meeting. And that's it. Where is it? I got this one more slide. And the laptop crashes. Oh no, that's it. So first up, I believe, is Scott, if you'd like to say a few words about where BPBIS is. There is a flicker somewhere.
Oh,
over there?
I think this is all PDF'd.
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't?
No.
Try it or shout next.
Okay.
Looks like we will do this manually.
I think
Okay.
we'll do this manually.
Well, okay, so I'm Scott Burley. I'm one of the three authors of the BPBIS specification. We've gotten Magnus's evaluation back and have put together responses to the points in the evaluation. This is like 30 slides, so I don't know what kind of the time budgeting we want to do here. We can go through all of this, or we can leave it to the end.
This is the first document at the top of our work. So
Yeah.
we need to clear it out.
Okay, good.
So I think we should take, the time,
just-
especially also using the high bandwidth with
Yeah,
Magnus. So the only thing I could say is maybe skip the, typos or details and,
Okay.
And then
All right, we'll-
concentrate on the.
I'll try to go through it rapidly. So what I've done here is I copied Magnus's evaluation and there were like 20 points, and for each of those points there is like one, or sometimes it's spilled over onto two slides, and I've copied in his text and my proposed response to that item. And so let's see, this is the status of things right now, and so we'll go on to, let's try next then. Let's just say next. Okay, so first comment was that the DTN URI scheme needed to be registered, and so there's a section 10.3 that's been added to the newest draft, which is draft 14. I couldn't post it, the window had closed on posting internet drafts, so I emailed that draft to everybody on the DTN working group mailing list, so you should have a copy. And I will. I meant to post it last Sunday and never got around to it, but I will post it sometime in the next few days and get it onto the to data tracker. And he also suggests that the IPN URI scheme, which is registered, is registered as temporary. I think it needs to be moved to permanent, and I agree with that. We certainly need to do that. I wanted to get the DTN scheme registered first, and then move both of them from temporary to permanent, because that there's a review period that takes some time there. But I don't see any objection.
So, Rick Taylor speaking personally, I have no objection to a DTN URI scheme, and please correct me if I've got the wrong end of the stick here, but URI schemes and that kind of thing are really, as I understand it, a way for external tooling to understand that the protocol they're going to be using to do whatever the user or the other system has requested is based on the DTN protocol stack. So if we are using URIs to distinguish endpoint names within DTN, then we don't need to use the global public URI schema registry.
Oh.
Or if we want to say we want a global top-level URI scheme so that Apple can put it in Safari and Google can put it in Chrome, then grabbing two of them and saying, well, it's just a different way of formatting the resource part of your URI, but it's all just a DTN-y kind of thing, seems wasteful and confusing. I have no objection to just DTN, but having IPN as well, which kind of does the same thing, but the substring format is different. I'm not sure we're doing the right thing there.
This is a topic on which I have no informed opinion. So if we need to register the URI schemes, I'm fine with doing it. If we don't need to, I'm fine with not doing it. I think it is important that the schemes be defined somewhere. So since we do have a definition of the IPN scheme in the registry now, and since there is a definition of the DTN scheme in section 2.10.3 of the BPBIS draft, which is certainly subject to amendment. We haven't settled on that yet, but when we eventually take that draft forward, that'll be standardized. If that's sufficient, that's fine with me. I have no feeling either way.
Mark here. Yeah, the two are already registered. So
I understand.
So what's the cost, right?
Well, they're temporary rather than permanent.
Yeah. So I mean, the fact that we may use it or not, it's another discussion, right? So and it's been deployed already.
No, and I completely understand that, but it's the difference between the fact that we're proposing to use a URI formatted endpoint name within DTN is conceptually different from a URI scheme that's designed to go out beyond DTN to user access devices. And I'm trying to think about the right wording for this and looking at someone who I know has more experience in desktop applications and user devices. So a bit like HTTP URI, any device out there that sees an HTTP URI understands, oh, I got to bring up my HTTP protocol stack and go do this thing. And I'm thinking about it at that level. So if you see if I'm sent an email by you with a link saying DTN:, I know if I click that link, I will go do DTN to get to whatever you're sending me.
Right. So it's like HTTP sets up an ecosystem of its own, and we don't expect to do that with the DTN and IPN schemes.
Okay, so are we therefore registering in the right registry? Because it looked like the DTN URI registry went into that IANA registry for things like HTTP.
I didn't know that there were multiple scheme registries. So
I know there's all sorts of nonsense in that top-level registry, but should we be contributing to the noise?
So, Magnus Preston. It's a good question to ask yourself if it's the right registry, but if you're going to use these, let's say, the formats of the URI, etc., I think the right thing is to keep the registration, even if it's primarily now, I mean, the DTN URI, if I understand, is for node IDs. It might not be that it doesn't have the same semantics as like HTTP, but there are other things in this which is just identifiers, etc. in these schemas. So it's a bit. There's huge freedom here to use what you do under your own schema.
Absolutely. Sorry, Rick. Still, absolutely, and I agree that DTN. I'm all for registering DTN as a top-level URI. I'm not sure registering IPN as well is relevant, because an IPN naming schema could just go straight under the DTN : and then you say, oh, well, actually, this is an IPN rather than a textual. But it's all just a DTN thing. You know, this URI says this resource is accessible via, well, it's URL rather than URI, but, you know, this resource is located via the DTN protocol.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, well.
Eric Klein. I was going to say I have very limited experience so far with registering URNs for CatPort and that kind of thing underneath the IETF space. Those
Yeah,
I would expect. I'm afraid I don't understand enough about IPN to know whether or not it could be its own thing or belongs underneath. The IPN scheme is used exclusively in the current implementations and deployments of DTN. So
to identify endpoints?
Yeah.
I thought DTN identified an endpoint. 50 section 4.4
the IPN scheme is we're running DTN on Space Station, and that deployment of DTN uses exclusively IPN endpoints.
but they're just names.
Yeah, they're just names.
They're just names. So I would, my counter argument would be,
Do I need a mapping from one name to another?
yes. But there's now, this is another
okay.
working
Yeah,
item.
That's
sorry.
a whole
And that's,
additional work.
and that's when we had a proposed future charter item about naming and addressing. That's to go into that. How do we map between different named areas, et cetera, et cetera. But my argument stands that this is all DTN. And if you see a DTN prefix, then you say, well, what comes after DTN colon? Oh, I get this. Now we're into the DTN naming thing. And whether the next thing is an IPN or the next thing is a textual string doesn't matter, because the protocol handler from the user application or whatever goes, I'm doing DTN now.
But without the letters IPN at the front, they won't know how to parse it.
Yeah, that's the point.
Well, it would be a formatting change to the AVNF for DTN. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, that's what and I'm drifting into the next charter item. I'd like to see DTN colon IPN colon as compared to DTN colon some other subschema. But we're going off course here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're changing the specs.
And we're changing the specs.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are
I believe this document says it's DTN colon and then effectively free text is all you're specifying at the moment.
There's some structure.
That's not what people have been deploying, and it's not what is in the section 10.3 that I just
I
posted.
need to read that again then. Okay.
Yeah, because what people have been deploying is DTN colon / DNS name / demux, and that's what I wrote in 10.3.
Yeah, and I mean, Magnus Westland here again. I mean, I think it's actually now you need to make a decision about this, because you already have a structure for how you include different namespaces and map that to this numeric namespace and all those things in the protocol. So yeah, it's and also think about the implications of actually putting IPN under DTN URIs. So I think you need to think this through.
I'll retract my objection.
Okay.
I just wanted to flag it up, but
Okay.
I have received compelling arguments not to change the status quo. So yeah, it's fine.
Okay. So do we have a satisfactory response to your point number one, Magnus?
Yes, I think you have. So but I definitely want people to review Is there any change to the ABNF, etc. for DTN, or didn't really have a structure before when you registered it temporarily for the DTN URI? I mean, is section 10.3? Is just that the same information that was already present, or has there been any changes comparatively?
Section 10.3 just sort of the current registration says the reference for it is look in the source code for the DTN2 implementation of BP. I swear that's what it says, right?
Yeah.
And so what we're doing here is we're saying, as best I understand it, the source code for DTN2 says that DTN colon / DNS name / demux is what is typically used, and so it documents that. That's all that is happening here.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. I would propose we go to slide 2. Number 2. This is the thing we spent quite a lot of time talking about, time, and we could spend probably the rest of the day talking about that here. You've had a chance to look at the text that I inserted into the spec, and what do you think about that? The basic issue is expressing the time representations and time fields in the bundle protocol as Unix epoch time rather than UTC, and the argument for that being that Unix epoch time is continuous without the discontinuities introduced by leap seconds, and so that makes it easier to do arithmetic on time intervals and so forth, because you just subtract the times rather than having to worry about whether you add a leap second or not. And so that is the explanation that has been inserted into the specification now. And is that okay?
I mean, from my perspective, it's fine. I mean, I responded when I asked this question, was like understanding it, and I think you added quite a lot of text to explain the motivation, etc. And I think that makes it clear for anyone coming after why it's like it is, and why it hopefully makes sense for everyone. So, yeah. So I had no intention to override the working group consensus here. It was really like, okay, have you thought about all this? And the answer was obviously yes. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And of course, if the working group, if anybody in the working group objects to this, then we should discuss it some more. But I feel strongly that this is the simplest and best way for us to go forward on times in time representation in DTM.
Chair hat on. It's all, yes, if the working group has discussion about this, please feel free to chip in, but we are post working group last call, so the working group has previously said they are happy with this. So sure, discuss, but please keep it sweet or we'll still be here next year.
So a high-level commentary about this is that I do want the working group to review all these changes, because it's quite significant changes.
Of course.
And I would be very happy to see at least a few people posting on the mailing list saying, yeah, I reviewed these changes and I'm happy with them, etc. That's so that you actually look through them, and so before we progress.
Sure, that sounds good. Slide 3. Seaborn signed it. Right. So I added some text in 4.1.6 that points out to the implementer that these numbers may go beyond 32 bits, and I'm happy to add some necessary normative references. I didn't know which ones, which normative references you thought were needed there. So if you can, we have to do it right now. If you can send me that offline, that'd be great. Okay. Next slide. Right. So this is something going back. We've been talking about this for quite a long time. If you don't have synchronized clocks, then timestamp 0 goes in the creation time for all bundles, and the you need to figure out the time to live and expiration time on a bundle on the basis of the bundle age block rather than the current time versus the creation time, and that is discussed in section 4.3.2. So I added a forward reference to 432 in section 4.2.2 to address this comment. The report to EID. I think there was no text explicitly saying that the primary block is now immutable and will never be changed, and that includes the report to EID. So I added some text in 4.2.2 that says the primary block is immutable. Maximum hop count upper limit. And yeah, this is a good point. Can it be like 65 billion hop count upper limit? And this is this is written into the spec as something that is beyond the scope because we have no idea how to set it. We could put a number in there. I don't know what number to put in there as a maximum hop count, as a maximum limit. My personal feeling on this is that hop count as a device for triggering destruction of a bundle is kind of a backstop that you really should be using time to live instead, and this is kind of a slender reed to lean on. But I'm fine with adding this extension block. I know that people feel it's going to be useful, and in that context, if we want to come up with a maximum value, I'm fine with inserting that. But I didn't know what maximum value to use.
Marc Blanchet, as an individual, up count in the IP world is actually useful for detecting loops.
Yeah.
So in some ways, even a large number that would, never be.
It would not be useful as a mechanism. You're right.
I was going to say the inverse, which is a maximum number which is so large that no deployment will ever reach that. It will be actually useful for detecting a loop.
Okay.
Because if you reach that number, you're in trouble.
Okay, so
I haven't think about the right number.
Well,
but what I'm saying is, like Magnus' comment, that we should probably, identify a number.
I'm perfectly fine with identifying a number and putting it in there, and I'm open to suggestions as to the value of that number.
Wrong and felt, but in a DTN, a loop is sometimes not a bad thing.
Yeah. But going round and round and round that loop forever may well be a bad thing.
Do we want to say 255? Do we want to say...
Rick, just chipping in at this point personally, my consideration here is that this is an extension block, but can an intermediate node replace this extension block to the point where it says, okay, so say we go for 255, and someone who from a position of authority says, I know I've got this to a safe place within my network, I will now start forwarding it on, having rewritten that block. Then a low number makes sense. But if it's an immutable value that is set by the source, who cannot predict how long his path is, then we have to have quite a big number.
It's an extension block, and it could be added, changed, removed anywhere along the path. So I would say it's a management device.
So a smaller number, it feels to me that a smaller number is more manageable. Once you start to go off into 64 bits, it's yeah.
Yeah, right. So can we reach a consensus on mailing list, maybe?
I think that's the right place for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Next slide. Question of mail. Oh yeah, right here. This was text talking about status reports could result in an unacceptable increase in the bundle traffic on the network, and Magnus's comment was that that some largish number, like on the a function of the number of nodes in the path, that number of status reports could be sent out, and so I added in 5.1 a note that that's something like 2 plus 2 to the 2 times n status reports, 2 times n minus 1 status reports could go out. So that comment is added in 5.1. And go to the next slide. So there's also a clarifying phrase added in 5.1 saying that status reports are intended to be used for functions like trace routing. And so that phrase has been added in 5.1. And the next slide, this was the last one on this point, is saying that policy mechanisms are supposed to limit the generation of status reports, and what those mechanisms are is beyond the scope of the specification. That we expect that will happen, and we don't try to nail that down here. And I think that's where the issue is left at this point. That it is possible for the user to ask for status reports on everything that happens on every bundle, and there needs to be some sort of a management mechanism to defend against that. But I don't think we can legislate it in this specification. I don't know, Magnus, are we okay there? Or? Oh, okay. Okay, next slide. Let's see if. Okay. Some clarifying text in 5.3 that says what the rationale is for the language about disavowing, suppressing the node's membership in the destination endpoint. And the basic idea there is that at that point in the specification, you are dispatching a bundle. It happens to be a bundle that is maybe it's a multicast bundle. The bundle destination is an endpoint in which there are multiple members, one of which is the node that is currently forwarding the bundle. And so a copy of the bundle may have been delivered, and yet that's not the end of the story. The fact that you've delivered the bundle locally does not mean that you don't additionally go ahead and forward it, because it's a multi-point delivery bundle. And for that purpose of forwarding it, the local node is disavowed as a member of the endpoint, because otherwise you get into an infinite loop where you forward the bundle, the node will forward the bundle to itself after having delivered it once. So there's clarifying text added to 5.3 to explain that. Let's see. This was a excellent catch that section, instead of saying the remaining steps of section 5 are skipped, it should be the remaining steps of section 5.4 are skipped. So that's changed. Endpoint unintelligible and block unintelligible. To clarify that, it does mean that the receiving bundle protocol agent can't process the block for some reason, either that it's malformed or that it's corrupted, or it's a type of extension block that the implementation doesn't recognize. So Magnus' question here is there a point in separating out the case where the CRC indicates a corruption? And so there's I've added a new step 3 in section 5.6 to address this. We're almost halfway through. Service description appears very high level.
Because the co-chair is not providing comments.
Yes, I've shut up.
We're going fast here. We're going well. Let's see. Bundle agent. The service description and what is expected from the convergence layer adapter. First of all, the point about the bundle agent needing a signal when the convergence layer adapter has finished forwarding the bundle, yes, that's absolutely needed. And so there's a second bullet that has been added into the list of required services from the convergence layer in 7.2. Beyond that, we really want to not constrain implementations of bundle protocol and convergence layer adapters any more than we have to. In this interface between the convergence layer adapter and the bundle protocol, it doesn't really have any impact on interoperability. It has to do with implementation, and so I think it's best not to impose any further constraints on this interface. Magnus, do you have a thought on this?
So no, not today actually. I think I need to read. I mean, I understand that this is very different for different convergence layer and how that there are things like if your radio transmitter has a certain amount of bandwidth that overproducing bitrate is capable of sending out the data in, and TCP is going to have varying depending on destinations and all those things. So yeah, it's I might come back to this after I read the convergence layer, and if I have any follow-up comments.
Yeah.
But yeah, I will review the text changes in detail next week also. But
that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then one more page on this. There's a 2 of 2. And again, trying to avoid over constraining, and we do have some implementation experience that indicates that we seem to be okay here. That implementation seemed to be able to function well enough without any additional guidance. Next slide. This one is the one that Mark objects to, and I will point out here that I am neutral and agnostic on this, whether the bundle security protocol implementation in any bundle protocol implementation is required. I'm happy either way, but I will step aside and let Mark speak.
Mark Lashes, individual. One of the use cases of DTN and BP is in space, where DTN is essentially the network protocol, and it has, a layer down. So in those, which is, an important use case for DTN.
Absolutely.
In this context, then it is similar to IP. And in IP, we tried actually, in IPv6, for example, to force IPsec to be mandatory, but we fail. And if you look at the actual deployment right now, security services are actually up in the stack, mostly at the transport, at the TLS, HTTP level. I completely agree with this, because when you're more near the application level, then the application could actually, have a hook on what happens in security. When it's too down, there's, no connection, no hook in it, and the application doesn't know what security services were actually used. So, and that is, and BPSec, while, very good protocol, is actually pretty heavy duty. And, in forcing all the implementations to actually have BPSec is way too much for me. And it will, impede, for example, more IoT or embedded devices that are most likely to be in space too. So, I think we should think of security, much higher in the stack, or BPSec as a choice. So maybe there's some wording that should say, around, please apply security at some level. But I'm strongly against requiring BPSec in all BP implementations.
Magnus Bestlund. I understand that argument. I think this goes into part of the choices you need to do when you do particular deployments, because it might be more reasonable for the reindeer net or whatever, or some other deployment here on Earth for to actually use security, because you have much easier, you have easier access to and troubleshooting all these things, which is probably one of the major downsides with actually having the security in always, and that if it fails, you can't get back. And I buy that for some space usages. But I think we want to try to recommend usage of BPSec, and be very clear that this is a deployment consideration, and that you really should think about how you secure it. Because at the same time, in certain type of deployments, this is going to be from a bit up in the stack anyway, and not wasting the store and forward resources actually might be highly relevant. So And BPSec can help with that, with ensuring that you have only authenticated and known for the agents, etc. So,
from my own perspective, we are, I believe, in spaceflight communication, spaceflight mission communications. We're increasingly going to be needing and implementing security, and end-to-end security provided by BP is, I believe, is going to be a good thing for that. At the same time, I recognize that it is there's a lot that goes into BPSec, and implementations are non-trivial. There's a lot of work to do it, and there's processing overhead. So my inclination here would be to say that BPSec in any bundle protocol specification is strongly recommended as opposed to required. That would be my own preference.
So Rick Taylor speaking personally, I'm actually happy with the blue text. I understand both sides of this argument. So the inclusion of bundle security protocol implementation being a requirement, if you've got a BPA, you should implement bundle security protocol. That doesn't necessarily mean the operator is going to turn it on, but it does mean it's available. You know, the coders out there really, you do this. This is important. Because there are, I see Mark rushing to the mic. There are use cases I completely understand where you don't want this, but you really should.
Just an example. I have a relay in space. It just relays. Does nothing.
Yeah.
Why do I need, BPSec in it?
Are you the target's agent?
No, I'm just a relay. I'm just, relaying stuff, right?
But that doesn't matter. As I'm looking at Ed to clarify this, but that's fine. A BPSec enabled bundle arrives. You can check it. You may decide not to validate it. You can say, yeah, CLC looks good, forward it.
Yeah, therefore,
you're not breaking the privacy.
I don't need BPSec then.
Okay, yeah.
That's the point. Yeah, I mean, there's multiple roles in different places, and think about IP.
Yeah.
We don't have IPsec. It's not running.
Yeah.
So this is Ed Borain. I stood up because Rick said Ed Borain. So
It's a reflex action.
Well, so and I think we called this out early in the BPSec document, there are multiple ways of getting security for your application data. The application payload could be ciphertext or signed text as part of the user payload to begin with. Obviously, there can be security at other layers in the stack. In particular, BPSec is meant for the cases where you want to secure individual blocks in a bundle separately, or you want to provide security as a service to application layers. I'm fine with strong recommendation as opposed to required. I don't know that the implementation of BPSec is onerous, but the processing of the cipher suites and so on may be for resource-constrained nodes. And I would say that if you were a relay spacecraft and you were doing bundle inspection as opposed to bent pipe, you may want to do the kinds of verification of bib blocks and understand whether certain security items are or are not present in a bundle for the purpose of throwing traffic away before it goes into the network. And one of the things that we do look at for relays as entry points into the network at large is what kind of filtering can they do to tamp down wasteful traffic. But there are other ways of handling that as well. So I recommend, strongly recommend, as opposed to required.
Magnus, I mean, there's another aspect of this, which is that BPSec is not enough. You need to have, also in that case, if you're saying required, you also need to point to one cipher suite document.
Right.
Or security content.
Right.
Yeah.
That's in the pipeline, and it
Yeah.
should be chasing BPSec document.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but I think it's, and I'm willing to defend recommended here. That's my statement towards the security it is, because I'm going to be on the front line to have to argue this, but yes.
Marc Blanchet again. I think in IETF words, it should be should instead of must. So what we were talking was must implement, and then it should say should instead of strongly,
Fine. Fine.
That's the IETF, verbiage.
I'm happy to change to the language. Absolutely.
Just with my chair hat on, can I gauge the consensus of the room just on this one? I'm going to do this as a hum, just because they're fun. Those in favor of should, i.e. recommended, not mandatory, can you hum? And those who think it...
Wait.
Oh, yeah, okay. It still counts. And those who want mandatory, required, must verbiage, hum. Okay, so that's seeming. And here comes Ronald to.
Sorry, question. Mandatory to implement or mandatory to use?
I think we're only talking about mandatory to implement, right? I think it is.
We can't force people
mandatory
to
to use was never on the table.
Yeah. So yeah, mandatory to implement. I heard silence, so I think we got consensus there. So obviously we'll take it to the list as well. If anyone on the list or on Java has strong opinions, please chime in. Should we move on?
Excellent. Next slide. Section 9. Converged layer protocols should be used. Also, wouldn't it be reasonable to recommend using encryption at the convergence layer to avoid eavesdropping on the part and prevent traffic analysis by third parties? And that is a reasonable thing to recommend, and that's added in the 4th paragraph of Section 9. Okay, more on Section 9. And this again is status reports. And do we need mitigations to prevent status report bundle storms? And next slide, I think, is the continuation of this.
Sorry.
And so what I did for this is there is step 2 of Section 5.4 says that the bundle protocol can essentially can decline to forward a bundle for various reasons that are listed in the table that is in Figure 4. None of the reason codes in Figure 4 addressed sort of arbitrarily this bundle is too much, we have to throw it away. And so I've added one more reason code for not that it's necessarily going to be used in status reports, but just so that it's an additional authorizing reason for declining to forward a bundle. So I think that's a sufficient mechanism for dealing with the excess traffic that is status reports, for example. So I think that's as much of a mitigation as we can reasonably impose here. Next slide. Discussion of how sender of a status report should set the lifetime and max hops. And here we really do not, really lifetime and maximum hops, these are still research topics. Just exactly how you set these things, we don't know, and I think we want not to try to constrain it in this document. I think it's something that ought to emerge in the course of operations and deployment and in research. So I would prefer that we not say anything more about it here. Next slide. Okay, this is the IANA section, I think, and several improvements. Individual subsections, I've added individual subsections for the registry operations, and the references to specific sections of this document have been added in those subsections. Next slide. let's see. Yeah, if the registry says that RFC 7116 is the origin of this registry, then we should go back and look at the registry, because 7116 is the definition of the Licklider transmission protocol. I think 6255 is the right reference here. Next slide. Oh, is there a comment?
All I did was pull up 7117, and the title of it is LTP, CBH, E, and Bundled Protocol IONA Registries.
7117 or 7116?
7116, sorry. Oh, you were talking about 7117?
No, 7116.
It's like
okay.
It's like an IONA registry for like everything.
Okay.
All I did was look it up.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, well, when I looked it up, maybe where I looked it up was wrong then. Okay. So, okay. So here the comment is that there's a confusion about what things are actually called, whether they're bundle block types or bundle protocol block types, and bundle block types is the right name for them, and the block types defined in BPv7 are a superset of the block types defined for RFC 5050. So I think we don't need a new registry for it. I think it's just extending the existing registry, and I'm happy to be guided by somebody else on this, but I don't think we want to do a new registry for block types.
Rick speaking personally again. My gut reaction is, as a developer looking at implementing BP7, I go look at the registries to work out how big my enumerations are and things like that. And if there's lots of BP6 data types that aren't relevant in BP7 mixed in, and I'm not sure how much creating a new registry costs.
No,
IONA.
I certainly agree with that, but because it's a superset, because all of the BPv6 ones are retained in BPv7.
In which case, that's okay.
I think it's. I don't think any of them have been discarded.
My question there then. Is it likely that anyone would like to extend version 6?
Not at the IETF, because I think one of the later questions is whether we obsolete 5050, and I'm hearing rough consensus currently, but we'll check it, to obsolete 5050 and go with this document. If another SDO wishes to continue doing its in-house changes to 6, I think they take ownership of that registry.
But that's the problem, and it's where either you have a common registry across the versions, and then you maybe need to indicate which versions a particular registration is valid for.
This is getting us into a topic that we're about to reach, I think, and I'd like to slip that until we get to that topic. Next slide. Okay, for the new registry, any requirements for registrations, and is this registry's version 7 specific or not? And I believe it is not. The registry is, because it's a superset of what's in RFC 5050. Again, I think it doesn't. This one is a new registry, which it doesn't pertain to RFC 5050 at all. So there isn't anything that is being superseded by the addition of this new registry. And the new registry is scheme type codes. I think it is URI scheme type codes. Next slide. References for the CRCs, and that's right. And Brian also commented on this. So there are now 2 CRC references in the normative references section, one for the CRC 32s and one for the CRC 16s. Next slide. This is again in references. I changed BPSec to be a normative reference. RFC 6255, because it's normative reference for registration procedures, should that be normative? So I put that in the normative section, but it's an informative RFC. So if ID NIST is okay with that, then I'm okay with it. But and I have not tried yet because I haven't tried posting the RFC, posting the internet draft rather.
I mean, and in this specific case, I need to check again but it's, I mean, it is possible to reference informative documents, but we have to do a specific action when going to the IETF loss call and calling that out that we are having this down ref, what is called.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so, but let's check if it's needed or not and come back on that because I think it's, I need to, I don't have the context for that particular document in the head now, so.
Oh, okay.
I can hopefully guide you on if
Good.
Yeah.
That I'm happy to be guided there. So almost done here. Let's see. Primary block immutability, and again, I added some text about primary block immutability in 4.2.2. And no, the last one I think is next. Optional CRCs. Why are the CRC blocks optional? And the reason there is that if you have a BPSec bib, then you don't need a CRC. If you and yet you may not always have BPSec bibs because you may not be using BPSec, and in that case you do need CRCs. So that's the rationale for making them optional. And we can change that if we want to, but I think that's I think it's a reasonable policy. Next slide. Is there some more on this? Yeah.
Not Lashe. Would it be possible to start, for example, in the ground, having multiple ups in the ground? Then when it goes in space, you actually use BPSec, secure that part. And then some other path, you actually, remove BPSec and then continue, for example, in the spacecraft.
Yeah.
In this context, the source node doesn't know that BPSec will actually be used in some path.
That's right.
Segment of the path. Therefore, your argument about if BPSec is used, I don't know.
Well, but
and then the part which are not BPSec enabled would then not have CRCs. So it looks like in some ways you may always do CRCs because you don't know if someone in the path will actually be doing BPSec.
But if you are using BPSec from the source, then it seems like you shouldn't. There's no point in adding a CRC as well. And if there is a case in which CRCs are not mandatory, then I think they have to be optional. Yeah, I mean, you're right that if you're at the source and you're not using BPSec, then you absolutely ought to be using a CRC. But in some cases, and I would argue in most cases, I think BPSec is great stuff. So I think in most cases, a bib on the primary block at the source is the right thing to do. And in that case, I don't see a point in a CRC.
Maybe that works.
So Magnus, it might be that mucking around with optional CRCs is actually unnecessary, and it's like we're not removing the checksums just because you have IPsec AH, for example. It's like it's probably easy to just keep the CRC in, and for the nodes that doesn't validate bibs, it can validate the CRCs and things like that. So it's probably unnecessarily optimization, so to say, to try to remove it or not have it. It's easy to have it always and always be able to verify it for any.
Rick Taylor, personally, +1 for that comment, because that was the discussion we had 10 minutes ago about having a BPSec implementation and the intermediate relay nodes. If they don't have any BPSec in there because they're a sort of bent pipe, then they have nothing to check.
Okay, so do we have the consensus in the room that the CRCs on all blocks are mandatory, or that a CRC on the primary block is mandatory?
I'm happy to. Do we want to hum, or does anyone
Well,
want to jump
we
to
have several choices here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's right. There's CRC on the primary block. There's primary block. There's CRCs on each individual extension block. There's CRC on the payload block, right? So where do we want them to be mandatory?
So Ed Bahrain, one of the other discussions we had earlier when we contemplated CRCs was what happens if the underlying convergence layer itself is providing some indication of corruption. And if I have 100 blocks in my bundle, does that mean I have 100 CRCs in my bundle that I then need to verify at every step of the way along the bundle if I'm then also using a convergence layer which provides some integrity checking mechanism already?
So that, Rick, here, that sounds like an argument to remove CRCs altogether, because a convergence layer might do it, or we have bibs.
Well, and originally there in FireC 5050 there is no CRCs, and we've taken endless criticism for not having CRCs. So, okay.
I think that, Ed Bahrain again, I think one of the difficulties about deploying BP in the way it can be in an overlay setting is that it depends on what you're overlaying. So there are cases where a CRC is quite useful for some or all blocks, and some cases where it's really not useful. And the difficulty is in the cases where it is not useful, it can be very not useful. And that would be my recommendation for keeping them optional.
Ron Lindveld, an argument that has been used in the past is that the bundle may be corrupted while at rest.
Yeah, good point. So Rick, again, from my personal perspective, going back to the other question, was I think a CRC has, or some integrity check on the primary bundle, primary block is important, because that covers a lot of the privacy. Is this going the right kind of direction?
Well, it's integrity more than it's not privacy, it's integrity.
Integrity. So yes, it's immutable.
It's immutable, right?
So a CRC on that immutable block seems to make a lot of sense. From my perspective, bib does everything a CRC will do and some.
Yes.
And we have bib available in BPSec.
Yes.
So, and that's where it's almost as though the CRC is BPSec light, but written in this document and mandatory.
So,
yeah.
So, but okay, Magnus. I mean, I would like to make an observation here. I don't have a strong opinion. I think what might be required here is actually the use of CRCs or not, and if they are mandatory to use in certain blocks, that should be something the deployment case should define. But we mandate, I mean, it's mandatory to be able to.
I think the implementation is mandatory.
Yeah. I think inclusion is optional, and then it's up to the deployments to discuss on which type of blocks, etc. they want to have CRCs, because that might be affecting which type of convergence layers, how they use BPSec and all these things.
So, question to Scott. Do you feel you're getting clear direction from the room, or do you want to take this to the list?
I think it needs to go to the list. I don't think we have a clear direction. If I were going to say something right now and say, here's the answer, I would say CRC is mandatory on the primary block and optional on all the other blocks. And I suspect that's where the where the mailing list will end up. But
might I suggest you just propose that straight on the list, and hopefully you'll get a load of plus ones and nobody chipping in, and we can make progress.
Okay, go ahead.
No, go first.
Go ahead. It's the same topic still.
Yeah. Okay, so if you think we must have a CRC on the primary block, please Okay. Please if you don't agree, we must have a CRC on the primary block. Okay. Nobody care. Coffee time or
I think this is mailing list. It's too complex.
I actually want to back up slightly to the IANA issue.
Oh, yes.
Because Brian Haberman and me had a little bit of conversation in the Yabby chat room about 6255. And one way of making actually this document cleaner is to suck in the registration rules for those registries into this BP document. Basically copy the registration rules from that into the IANA section of this and replace, so we can obsolete 6255 also at the same time.
Oh, and delete the reference to 6255?
Yeah,
Yes.
Just a basic.
Sure.
Because then you get all the necessary parts in this document.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that might be a way forward to avoid that toll.
I'm hoping this is being captured in the notes, and just so that okay, great. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So I think that's it's the last of the slides on this. Yeah. There is this other topic about obsoleting 50/50. Do we want to talk about that now, or
should we do? I think we should do that now because we're on BPBIS. So for those who are not aware, of course, this is Bundle Protocol version 7. RFC 50/50 is Bundle Protocol version 6. RFC 50/50 is experimental, and it actually was an IRTF document, if I'm correct. So the question put to us by the AD is, does this obsolete RFC 50/50, or does it not? You know, is this just a new protocol from an affiliated but different standard body?
And what I have, the reason in the I think in the document Shepherd write-up, there's a section that, is there anything obsoleted by this specification? And my feeling is that it's not, because RFC 50/50 is not a standard. It's an experimental RFC, and so it's not actually obsoleted because it's not an existing standard. But I don't know what the protocol is in IETF about that sort of thing. So if it's obsoleted, it's obsoleted.
Yeah, Mark Lee as co-chair. I mean, it's like IP, right? We did have, so there's multiple versions of protocols that go over time, and what you do is the new one actually just says, obsoletes the previous one. Therefore, people, you can still implement and use the previous one. It just says a signal that, this is the new one.
My thinking had just been that obsoleting had to do with other RFCs that were standards track RFCs as opposed to informational or experimental.
So Magnus, actually this is something I haven't done, is reaching across the streams, because this is going from the IETF stream to the IRTF stream, and I actually need to consult a bit about that, and it's probably fine. But I mean, I do see a point of at least indicating that this is very much a replacement, that you should use this instead. And for that, and the ISG is actually working on a new set of labels, which will be clearer from some perspective. And in this case, there's one of these other labels that would at least make sense to add, even if we don't formally obsolete the IRTF specifications. But yeah, it seems that it needs to be a little bit more discussion.
Yeah, Eric Klein. I didn't, I'll just note that I'm not aware of IPv6 formerly obsoleting IPv4, but also this is not the same thing. And if you didn't want to obsolete it, you could always write a separate one-page 50/50 moves to historic draft document.
But that's another thing. It's not exactly the same.
You're right. That's not the same. But if you really wanted to indicate that 50/50 is bundle protocol 6 is not to be used anymore, you could just write a one-page document to say that. If you didn't want to obsolete this.
So, dear AD, what's the plan? I guess
So, I mean, I want to understand what your intention. If your intention is saying that, yes, bundle, going forward after this being published, you should use version 7. If that's your main intention, then I know that, and we can figure out what the right way of is indicating.
The intention is for BPv7 to become the standard. Yeah.
And I think
that's the whole purpose of the working group, right?
Yeah, I'm hearing consensus, and as Mark said, the purpose of the working group is to do BP7 based on lessons learned on BP6. Yeah,
Exactly.
Make it standards track. So whatever the correct IETF label to put onto this document to say, this is the new version, don't do the old version unless you have, don't do it. You may have good reasons for it, but this is the IETF blessed new version.
Right. Yeah.
Cool. So I think it's a problem for Marcus.
Okay. So I think I've got a number of tweaks to make to draft 14. I'll wait for the minutes before I do that, and then I'll modify draft 14 according to what we've been saying here, and maybe some comment on the mailing list, and then I'll post draft 14 again. Okay. Or post draft 14 for the first time, and I think I'm done.
Mark, as co-chair, just a few notes. We, apart from your, editing and verifying and all that stuff, I think we should ask the working group mailing list for the maximum up limit. The maximum up limit. Oh, yeah. Yep. Right. And confirm if BPSec is a must or should. And the CRC, that's to me.
Mandatory CRC.
Yeah. Kind of the main.
Okay, so I'm watching the time. I'm trying to work out what do we do next. The next agenda item is...
So, I think...
the iron stuff? Great. Yeah. Excellent.
Escape.
So we have spent obviously more time in this first, but co-chair thinks that, given that's the main two primary documents that are the base of the working group, we should spend the high bandwidth time with the AD to actually to move forward. I'm not sure we will be able to do the whole agenda, but if not, then we'll either wait until next IETF meeting or do an interim. That could be the right thing to do. So.
Okay, so my name is Ed Bahrain. I'm the primary author on the BPSec security standard, and we just got comments back 2 days ago for the standard, and so we were able to go through them and give some recommendations as to whether we needed to change the specification or whether we just had clarifying text or explanation. So next slide. So we had 11 comments received. Based on those 11 comments, we're proposing 6 minor changes to the document. Nothing really changes from our perspective. The processing associated with security or the structure, most of it is clarifying and cleanup of the text. So I have, much like Scott did, a set of slides that go through piece by piece the comments received. And my proposal is at the end of each one, I'll pause just for a moment. If there's no concern or significant discussion, we'll assume that it is acceptable and then move on to the next item. So going forward, the very first one was we talk about the concept of security context, but we don't actually describe a specific security context. It's not because we don't have them. We made a decision in the working group that we wanted to publish interoperability security context as a separate document. And that second document exists. It's been adopted by the working group, and it is to go into working group last call. We can normatively, we can cite it in the section 1.2 of— and assume that it will then also go through a review. The second is in looking through the terminology associated with BPSec, we talk about a security source, but we don't, and we give that a name, the security source, which could be the node that applies any security operation into a bundle, whether that's the bundle source or a waypoint node somewhere else. But we don't actually define the peer to that security source, something that we had in the working group called the security destination. Originally, in both the original bundle security protocol out of the IETF and the very early versions of BPSec, there was a concept of a security destination. The difficulty that we had was that specifying a security destination as an endpoint in the network started to conflate the routing function and the security function. You could certainly get into strange cases where a bundle reaches the bundle destination first before it reached a security destination, and then what on earth do you do? And we can tunnel to ensure that there are particular hops that or waypoints that are traveled in one direction or in one order than another. But in terms of the spec itself, we do not mandate a security destination. So from a terminology perspective, we can certainly give it a name to say the security processing node or the security processing endpoint associated with the security service in a bundle. So we are happy to add that to the terminology section, but we'll come back and revisit the concept of mandating a security destination, whether that's a good idea or not in some of the other comments. Okay. The next one, this is a somewhat large block of text, and it says, what is the interaction between the bib, which provides plain text integrity, and the BCB, which provides encryption? And I will point to just the last few sentences here, which say, if we have blocks that are end-to-end in nature, to my understanding, this is not possible, as any bib using the second context can't use encrypted payload as its input. What this means is if you have a bundle, and Magnus, correct me if I'm misinterpreting, if you have a bundle that is using two security contexts, and one security context is there to encrypt blocks in the bundle using a certain cipher suite and a certain key, and then you have a second context which is meant only to provide an integrity signature or signature on some text, some of which is unencrypted and some of which is encrypted, you've really created two kinds of security users in the bundle. Those that have the keys and the understanding for decrypting the data, and those that have the keys and understanding of how to verify that the data has not been corrupted. If you use an AEAD cipher suite, then you must be able to understand the encryption key to be able to verify the signature of the encrypted data. And if you cannot have a BIB that targets an encrypted data, you can't add a second signature using this mechanism. So if we go to the next slide, we had talked through that. And one of the things we said in creating the concept of a security context, separate from a cipher suite ID, was that if you wanted to provide additional services associated with these blocks, continuing to add BIB and BCB blocks into a bundle that reference each other in perhaps circular dependencies is not the appropriate way to handle those kinds of situations. The recommendation for that, and we talked about this a little bit in section 7, was that a security context could define additional security results that would be captured with a BCB. So for example, if you had a security context that provided encryption, it would replace the contents of the target block with ciphertext. It would take the AEAD generated signature associated with that key and keep it as a security result in the BCB. And there is no constraint on having additional security results that are signatures created with different keys that could be created as part of a security context so that you could accomplish essentially that same result. So that was our proposal. We believe we can do exactly this kind of processing with the document as it stands, and we are hesitant to add additional allowances of what BIBs and BCBs can target one another, because the much larger issue is circular dependencies and ambiguity in processing associated with those kinds of blocks. And if there are questions about that, I'm happy to work through a specific example. If we need additional clarifying text in the document, I'm happy to provide that as well.
Magnus, yes. I find it quite reasonable to maintain the rules. I was wondering how this would be done, and I think one of the C's probably is this, if you could point to the encapsulation, because I guess that's actually the lowest overhead of doing, except for defining a new mechanism that contains both encryption and has two different sets of keys. So I mean, it seems for me, if I want to do this today, probably encapsulating the encrypted blocks in a new bundle would ensure that I can do this. So.
Oh, absolutely. Completely agree. Encapsulating and then putting separate security context integrity over that is one way to do it, and an elegant way to do it. And when we start talking about security destinations as some of the other contexts, encapsulation would be an approach to getting that as well.
Yeah. So maybe an informative forward reference here should say to saying that this is one way of achieving such goals, but
yeah, I agree.
Just to indicate that yes, the possibility exists despite these limitations.
Rick Taylor speaking personally. I found in my reading and understanding of the BPSec documents, there's an analogy to IPsec where you can either operate in tunnel mode where you're wrapping your bundle and putting the integrity stuff on the outside, or a transport mode where you are adapting the packet on the way through. It's complex, you know.
So another comment that came in was we discussed the concept of uniqueness of a security service in a bundle, which is to say, if you provide confidentiality on the payload, we don't want to then also do confidentiality on the same payload. And the comment was, is it only the target block and the security service, for example, confidentiality on the payload, or do you also add the security context itself, which is this particular kind of confidentiality on the payload is one service, but a different kind of confidentiality using a different cipher suite or a different key or a different set of parameters on the same block would not be considered duplicative. Again, this kind of thing was discussed in the working group in two ways. One in the concept of multi-encryption or super encryption, the other in terms of multi-key encryption or multi-algorithm encryption. Again, the comments coming out of the working group were, rather than to accomplish this with multiple BCBs and then have the discussion of, is it correct if any of the BCBs decode using any set of keys, or particularly if you were to apply this separately to BIBs, if any of the bibs verify as opposed to all of the bibs verify? Again, we wanted to push that into a security context, which would say that a security context would have a single BCB, which could generate results for multiple keys or multiple sets of ciphertext, and any overflow ciphertext out of a block would be captured as additional overflow data in the BCB itself. And again, this is the attempt to separate the concept of a one-to-one mapping of a BCB to a cipher suite, and instead have a one-to-one mapping of a BCB to a security context. And a security context is a superset of cipher suites and could have additional types of behavior. And the same with BIB. There was a comment in terms of the use of the security context flags and some of the reserve bits. Importantly, we use bits 1, 4, and 5 and reserve bits 2 and 3, and that seems strange to reserve bits in the middle of a set of flags. This was done partially for backwards compatibility with existing reference implementations from earlier versions of BPSec. I certainly have no issue with pushing bits 2 and 3, putting the flags that exist in bits 4 and 5 into bits 2 and 3. So simply bits 0, 1, 2, 3 are used and the rest are undefined, or perhaps having it be a byte field and putting reserved bits associated with that. I don't know if there's a particular opinion as to whether having reserved bits in the middle of a set of otherwise utilized bits in a bit field is good form or not. No.
Bits are just bits. It's just bits.
It's just bits.
It's just bits.
Another question was, why do we require an AEAD cipher suite? Again, these are cipher suites that generate a signature on the data as well as the ciphertext. The short answer is when we took BPSec version 06, where it's version 10 now, to the security area for early review, one of, and really the strongest comment that came back from the security area was that they asked that the cipher suite selections be mandated to be AEAD. And the thought behind that was it would be good to have a strong separation with the idea that bibs are for plain text and BCBs are for ciphertext, and whether a signature exists or not can occur in each of those contexts. But associating bib with open text and BCB with ciphertext would be the real separation. And anytime you generate ciphertext, you should be generating a signature along with it. Then the next question was policy guideline for blocks that have been removed from a bundle by waypoints along the way. And this is absolutely correct. It is something that can happen. The last sentence is here. I know that with the current mechanism, such a bib could be stripped. However, such a block could easily be required in a security policy for a particular deployment. And did we consider it? The answer is yes, and this was a matter of some consideration, and we addressed some of it in the security spec itself and some of it in upcoming documents. So if we go to the next slide, one of the things that has been discussed is whether a security source or the bundle source or both would be able to put together manifest blocks or table of contents blocks that say at the time the bundle was created or at the time a security source was created, these are the blocks that must exist in the bundle. That could be signed by for example, the bundle source, and as a matter of policy, a destination could require that such a manifest block exists. And if a manifest block does not exist, then the contents of the bundle are suspect to begin with, and perhaps the bundle is not processed or something else. The issue with requiring that is there are certainly many other ways of handling that same set of expectations. What we do discuss in section 822, which is in the security considerations portion of the document, is that for this reason where Mallory, being a person in the middle, could remove blocks from a bundle. In each of these cases, the implementation of BPSec must be combined with policy configurations at endpoints to describe expected and required security operations that must be applied on transmission and expected to be present on receipt. So we would expect a deployment to say something like, there must be a bib that signs the primary block. And we would expect that the payload block has a BCB associated with it. And if this does not exist, then this is outside of policy. And that policy could be configured out of band, or it could be in band with the required manifest block, in which the policy is simply make sure that a manifest block exists. In any of those cases, we don't think it is appropriate to specify that in the BPSec document, but we think that it certainly has been considered, and there are ways of discussing it. Next. There is a request to clarify section 3.9 on when to consolidate bibs, and we completely agree. So the answer here was, finally I realized that you could actually move a signature from one bib to another. This could be made clearer in the document. We can certainly make that clearer in the document. And that was the correct read and the intent. Sorry. No, it's okay. Speaking of unclear, in section 3.10 parameters and result identifications, we had some text that talked about non-normative guidance on how to select security context identifiers. And the short answer was, what does this mean? And how is this guidance for someone trying to select these identifiers? The history of this text was that before we had security context identifiers, we were saying cipher suite identifiers. And Stephen Farrell, in one of the working groups, had noted that there were existing registries of cipher suite identifiers, and why would we create our own enumeration of common cipher suites when many other folks had enumerated cipher suites, and would that cause confusion? Since that time, we came to the understanding that we aren't enumerating cipher suites, we're enumerating security contexts, which are a little different and a superset of, and we should be able to enumerate those however we wish, even if there are cipher suite enumerations, which are a different thing elsewhere in the literature. So I actually propose striking all of this text because I don't think it applies anymore.
I'm just keeping an eye on making Just watching the cogs turn.
How is a security destination determined? So many places in the BPSec document, we say things such as, if the receiving node is not the destination of the bundle, the node must decrypt the BCB if directed to do so as a matter of security policy. The comment that comes back is, it is unclear who is to process particular security blocks. The short answer is yes. It is unclear who should process the security blocks because of the nature of the store and forward network and the delay tolerance. The discussions from the working group were, if your bundle has been at rest for a very long time, it is possible that the topology of the network has changed, or the sense of gateway nodes has changed, or the intended destination of a security service may have changed. Certainly, all security services must be resolved by the time you get to the bundle destination, or the bundle destination itself must be able to resolve them. But if we have waypoints that are doing some level of security processing in the network itself, those boundaries between security areas versus end-to-end data delivery areas may be dynamic. And if we say that security policy, even if configured out of band, is sufficient to determine when to add a security service, right? Because any security service being added by a BPA is done so because policy has dictated it, then we should also accept that policy can determine whether you should be evaluating a security service. So by policy, a waypoint node may or may not determine that it should verify the signature within a BIB. By policy, it should determine whether it believes it is the decryptor of data to move forward. Certainly, if someone makes a mistake and they try and decrypt data and throw blocks away, by the time it gets to the bundle destination, the bundle would be considered in error because either the BCB wouldn't exist or the manifest block would be no longer valid. And there are ways that this can result in difficulty, but all of that difficulty stems from a waypoint node in the network tried to malign or misuse the security in the network. And of course, identifying and throwing data away in that case is what security is meant to do. So in all of this, our understanding is that policy to add security services and policy to process security services are what we need to do for a DTN. As was mentioned earlier, if there is a specific requirement that a particular node always processes a security service, one way to accomplish that without conflating security and routing is to encapsulate using a bundle and bundle encapsulation and making the destination of the encapsulating bundle the security endpoint, and then you know it will get there before it goes anywhere else. The final part is, since we do add registries for security context identifiers, we need to create it and define the rules for it. And the answer is absolutely, and we will update the IANA consideration section. And that's all we have. Yeah. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ed. Okay, so is this next? Yes, so Andrew Haberman on Meet Echo, presenting some of the work he's been doing as part of Ed's group on AMP. Andrew, can you attempt to approach the mic, or however it's done in Meet Echo?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yep. I think
right, perfect.
Yep, I think that's good. I won't touch anything.
All right. I am Andrew Haberman. I've been working under Dr. Rain for this summer on parsing string commands and creating a program that'll translate those string commands to their CBOR encoding, and as well as working on the AMP updates. Next slide. So in AMP06, we use arrays and byte strings to hold certain data items, and they were preceded by length identifying bytes or byte strings. But it's unnecessary because the data was self-delineating, and so what was happening is the message size was being increased, and it's being compounded by objects encapsulating other objects. And so with this update, we removed some of the length identifiers in order to decrease the message size and improve the encoding. Something else we also did was replace some of the array and byte string structures with just octets. This is just another way of decreasing the message size, because the headers, the CBOR headers, weren't needed to encapsulate the data. And so with these two updates, we were able to reduce the CBOR message size by about 25%. Next slide. Thank you. So for the string encoding, this is just to give us a way to go between the JSON and the CBOR encodings, and allow us to check to make sure everything is being processed as expected. And this also allows us to send commands and at a much faster pace, because it's easier to enter in. And with the program that I've been developing, that'll translate the string commands to CBOR. We can increase the speed at which commands are created and sent through the network. Next slide. So this is the formal definition of the ARI scheme for the ARIs. And one of the changes that we've made is within the namespace with the issuer and the tag. We've changed it to where we are always going to have an issuer, even if the element is published in an ADM. This way, the ARI is more uniform, and if the element is published, then we can just have the ADM as the issuer, and then have the tag just be the ADM namespace. And this makes the string command a lot easier to parse when you're trying to translate to CBOR. All right, and it's gone too far. Next slide, please. So this is just a brief example of what the updated string form looks like for a BP source report. With the ADM issuer, it does increase the length of the report slightly, but it does separate all of the different parts of the ARI out much better, makes it easier to parse. And also we have the full version and the shorthand version. And with the shorthand version, we would like to be able to parse this and use this to send commands. But with names having similar names, we do have an ambiguity error. That's for some commands, we do have to use the full version of the ARI namespace. And the short, yeah, that's next slide, please. So this is just a visualization of how the new encoding compares to the old encoding. The top bullet is the string encoding, and then it's followed by the new and then the old encoding. And so originally I had highlighted a couple of spots in each command, but they didn't show up. But you can see that if you look for the namespace or in the TMVC information and the certain object information, in the old command, they're split up by the length identifying bytes that were causing the message size to increase. And so with the new encoding, you can see that each part of the command is one right after the other. It flows right into the next part without having to. You don't have to sit and parse the length identifying bytes. And it also allows us to decrease the number of bytes by the way we represent each structure. So with the TNVC, you can see at the end of the first command, from the first example, we can represent an empty TNVC with just the 00 byte rather than having to use 2 or 3 bytes to represent it with by representing it as an empty array. And underneath each command, I've broken down the percent difference to where we're averaging around a 25% difference in message size between the new and old command. And that varies a little based on the command size, but it with a larger command, it'll obviously be a bit of a bigger difference.
So Andrew, sorry, Rick Taylor here, speaking personally. If I understand correctly what you've done, you've removed the implicit structure so you're not using the CBOR encoding to say, I have an array of 3 elements, each element is a string, in order to remove the TLVs. So you are presenting the entire command as an octet string or an octet array. Does that not mean you're adding white space sensitivity to these things? I notice in this slide you've got spaces between the square bracket, etc. Are you pre-parsing and putting into a canonical form before you turn it into an octet string?
We've removed the array header for some of the structures, not all of them. But yes, we do pre-parse it a little, if I understand your question correctly. We do pre-parse it so that the parameters are in the right order when we translate.
So you sort of unpack, concatenate, and then encode?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Carry on.
And actually, that's the end of the slide, so if we can go to the next one. So this is just a logical map of what the program does when parsing a string command. So we start with just the input, and what it does is it looks at the command as a whole first and generates a flag byte. It looks to see if it has parameters, and it checks to see what the issuer is. And this is where always having an issuer helps. We can check if it's ADM issued, then we can do a lookup using the dictionaries function I have in the bottom right hand corner, and we can get any parameter information and the nickname and object name information and begin to translate into CBOR. But what happens next is the parameter information we get from dictionaries, the dictionary function, and the parameters are sent to our TMVC processor. And using the parameter information, we can unpack the parameters and send them to a specific processor based on their type. And when it returns, we'll just get the CBOR encoded, CBOR translated parameter, and then we can concatenate them in the right order and send that back to parse the beginning function to put back into the command. And so we have functions for each kind of parameter. So variables, ARIs, expressions, we can all process. And then we also have the basic data structure functions. Those are on the right. And those are just used for your very basic string and uint and uvas parameters, but they work the same way, where you send whatever parameter you want translated, and you get the CBOR encoded version of that back. And with dictionaries in the bottom right, I mentioned earlier, but that's a file that contains all of the ADM issued controls. And every time you do a lookup, it sends back any information we have on that control, including parameter information, parameter type, nickname, and object name.
So Andrew, I'm very sorry to do this, but we are very short of time.
Okay.
So can you try and wrap up in about a minute?
Yeah, I can do that. I've only got one slide left.
Oh, brilliant.
If it will play. I don't know if it'll play.
No, which is unfortunate. Sorry. IETF slideshows are always a bit of a pain. Thank you very much for this. I'm going to. This actually segues nicely into. Sorry, any questions on this as it currently stands? So the question from the chairs to the group, based on Andrew's work and what Ed has been working on for a while, is this AMA, AMP network management piece. And this is a question for Marcus. So I know Ed and I, because personally I have a great deal of interest in this work, have been going around the IETF looking for a nice home in Ops or NetMod or Anima for this work, and frankly they're not interested, but we believe this is relevant, and I believe we're further down this line than, you know, we're going quite a long way down this, and I would like to see this taken on in DTN because we can't find a better home for it. Is that going to cause a problem for the AD? Because we're a transport working group, and another AD could turn around to Marcus and say, why are you doing ops in transport?
Magnus, but I think it's gonna, I mean, basically I think you're stepping beyond your charter anyway, and this is gonna require re-chartering if you take it on, and therefore this discussion is gonna happen on the way to that re-charter, I think. So so that's, I think, is something we can sort out, and let's discuss this more a bit offline also, so I can bring that information to you and take this discussion with, for example, the ops ADs, etc., so that they are aware and see what they say.
Magnus here as co-chair. However, I think it's been the last 2 years that we've been shopping a place.
Yeah.
And I'm getting concerned that, with, new ops ADs and we're starting again this shopping. So I think we have shown in the working group there are people actually working on it, and
that makes it easier saying that yes, either you have a really great home and we can get that into charter and get going directly in some other place. Otherwise, we take it on here. That's, I mean,
and obviously, when we're done, we could do working group last call, also, or have the ops area to actually look at it, all that stuff, but. It's getting to a point where we have no other home than here, even if we're not, management experts.
So thank you very much, Andrew. Good presentation. And of course, that feeds into this longer conversation. So the last thing we've got time for really is to Scott to just discuss what he thinks the working group should be looking at for the remaining charter items we have, and looking to recharter or refresh our charter in some way. And I think we're going to run out of time, but if Scott can blast through his slides very quickly.
And I really only have 3 slides.
Just before you start, co-chairs are currently thinking of having an interim meeting before the next IETF to actually discuss milestones, recharter, the next, topics to be working on. So we'll probably advertise this in the next weeks for scheduling an interim meeting, virtual meeting, obviously, by WebEx or whatever.
Okay, and let's go to the next slide. These are 3 items that I think I would like to propose that we add to the charter. They're just my own personal preferences. I actually think that network management is extremely important as well. And I don't mean this list to be exclusive. These are just my own personal top priorities. So my number 1 top priority is I think we need to have bundle encapsulation. I think it's urgently needed for two structural reasons. One is that we've taken custody transfer out of bundle protocol. We need to retain it, and this is the place to retain it. We need to reinstate it by standardizing bundle encapsulation that includes aggregate custody signaling as one of its features. The other reason is really related to what Ed was saying earlier. In moving from the original bundle security protocol specification to BPSec, we removed the notion of a security destination. The way to reinstate that capability is, again, using bundle encapsulation. You can use BIBE to direct a bundle to what is in effect a security destination and attach whatever security you need to it that needs to be processed by that destination node, and then move it on from that point without having to confute security and routing in the same protocol. It also has the advantage of giving us a straightforward way of defending against traffic analysis, because the encapsulated bundle can be encrypted so that its primary block is obscured. It gives us a way of temporarily substituting some various processing parameters that make it make traversal of a portion of the internet more palatable to the network operator. Things like priority and time to live. And if we care about doing source path routing at some point, it's a simple way of doing source path routing as well. There was an initial draft posted in January that, as far as I know, doesn't need any. Nobody's brought up anything that needs to be changed in it, but of course it's certainly open to editing. But this is my top priority. I think we should add this like toot sweet.
Mark, here as a co-chair, that has been already agreed in the working group and the previous AD. So we're.
It's just, I think it's not in the charter. So I think adding it to the charter is the right thing.
I didn't put in milestones or something, but because it's actually a piece that was in BP already.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, so that was agreed before. So
I have no problems taking encapsulation on because of how the charter is currently structured. So that's just submit the new milestone, or there's a milestone for custody in it there. So yes. I think it's the milestones need to be updated and revamped and reformulated maybe a bit. And so, but that's
you're
fine.
right. There's a milestones on custody. That I added. Yeah. Okay.
So good. Great. Okay. Number 2, quality of service. We also took quality of service out of RFC 5050. And I think, speaking from my own perspective, I know that I've got customers for quality of service that want to be able to specify priority on bundles. I think we are agreed that this is something that can easily be abused, so there needs to be some reasonable method of implementing custody of quality of service. And I'm open to completely open to discussion on this. We have, if we care about it, we have the extended class of service block defined in this ECOS draft from a couple of years ago as a starting point if we want. But we need to do something about it anyway. So I would propose that be at the top of our list for charter changes as well. And then the last is security distribution. We've talked about this a little bit. It's not a charter item yet. I believe it ought to be. I'm not going to claim that we have a final answer for it. We have an answer that has an implementation that we can talk about, but whether it's that answer or something else, I think we need to discuss it in the working group going forward, right away. So that's all I've got. Thanks.
Thanks, Scott. Okay, so we've got 2 minutes. Anyone want to leap to the mic and suggest any other random things they want to do? Otherwise, I'm going to suggest mailing list thread, people get on the list, suggest things they want to do, and an interim meeting, as Mark mentioned, probably after the summer vacation period, where hopefully we can sort of get some rough consensus on what we want to do that's in scope, that's acceptable to the AD and makes sense, and try and get it all done for Singapore.
Few topics that were discussed previously when we chartered the first time, and we're still remaining, just to prepare your minds. Convergence layers. Does LTP needs a new version for PPBIS?
SMTP?
LTP, for example?
Scott Burley. Yeah, LTP possibly, although this case for that is stronger in space, I think, than anywhere else. So whether it's the IETF or not, I don't know. But at the same time, SMTP. Yeah, I think that there's a very strong argument for being able to run bundles over email.
Maybe about avian carriers too? Well, DTN, I mean, it's like, that's the case for avian carriers.
It actually starts to make sense.
Addressing architecture, naming, routing, just, simple, topics, right? Neighbor discovery, network management, we discussed key management and quality of service, kind of my list of things that we kind of discussed before. So food of thought for your flight back to home.
Otherwise, standard administrivia. Has everyone signed the blue sheets? Has anyone got any final comments, debate, anything? Otherwise, on time, I'm going to wrap it up and say thank you very much, guys. And I'm sorry we had to cut short some of the presentations, but I think it was valuable. So thanks. See you in Singapore and at the interim, hopefully.
Mine is well, I mean, that's safer, right?
No, I know. I know. I've got that worst thing where I've got a transatlantic flight.